The sound of palm connecting with flesh echoed through Lagos's bustling Balogun Market like a gunshot. Amara Okafor stumbled backward, her white cane clattering to the concrete as hundreds of shoppers turned to stare. The woman who had been her husband's secret lover for 3 years stood frozen, designer handbag clutched to her chest, watching the domestic betrayal unfold in broad daylight. "Stupid blind woman. You embarrassed me in front of my business partner." Kemi Okafor's voice boomed above the market chaos, his hand still raised from the vicious slap he'd just delivered to his wife's face. "What would you do if you walked in on this kind of betrayal? Hit like if you've ever been betrayed, and comment below where you're watching from." Amara touched her burning cheek, feeling the warmth of blood where his wedding ring had cut her skin. She hadn't seen the woman's face, but she'd heard enough. The whispered conversations, the expensive perfume lingering on her husband's clothes, the way his voice changed when he spoke to his business partner, Folake Adebayo. It all made sense now. "Kemi, please, people are watching," Folake whispered, her Lagos socialite composure cracking as phones began recording the scene. But Amara wasn't thinking about the crowd anymore. She was remembering the voice recognition software on her phone, still recording from when she'd been trying to navigate the market's chaotic vendor calls. Every word of their affair, every cruel insult Kemi had just hurled at her, it was all captured in digital clarity. "I may be blind, but I'm not deaf," Amara said quietly, her voice carrying despite the market noise. "And I'm certainly not stupid." She bent slowly, her fingers finding her cane with practiced ease. Around them, the crowd began to murmur. In Yoruba, Igbo, and Hausa, voices rose in disapproval. A blind woman being struck by her husband in public. It was the kind of disgrace that would follow him forever in their tight-knit Surulere community. Kemi grabbed Folake's arm, pulling her away through the maze of fabric stalls and spice vendors. "Come on, let's go before this gets worse." But it was already worse. Much worse than he could imagine. Because as Amara stood there in her torn Ankara dress, blood trickling from her cheek, she was calculating. 13 years of marriage, 2 children, and a successful catering business she'd built despite her disability. All of it about to become weapons in a war Kemi had just declared. Mrs. Adunni, the elderly woman who sold bitter leaf 2 stalls down, appeared at Amara's side. "My dear, are you all right? That man has no shame, striking you like that." "I'm fine, Ma," Amara lied, accepting the offered handkerchief. "Just a small misunderstanding." But as she dabbed at the cut on her cheek, her other hand was already texting her sister-in-law Bizi, a family lawyer who specialized in divorce cases. The message was simple: "I need to see you. Today. It's urgent." The infidelity in marriage she'd suspected for months was now public knowledge. The emotional manipulation she'd endured in private had just become a spectacle for social media. And the cheating spouse who thought her disability made her helpless was about to learn that revenge served cold could burn hotter than any slap. What Kemi didn't know was that Amara had been gathering evidence for weeks. Bank statements, phone records, photographs that her seeing friends had taken at her request. The blind wife he just humiliated in Balogun Market was about to show him that she'd been watching him all along, just not with her eyes. As the crowd slowly dispersed and vendors returned to their business, Amara smiled for the first time in months. The revenge story that was about to unfold would hurt Kemi far more than his slap had hurt her. Because while bruises fade, the consequences of underestimating a woman's intelligence last forever. Her phone buzzed with Bizi's reply: "Meet me at my office in 1 hour." And Amara? Bring everything. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more gripping stories like this. What do you think Amara's revenge will be? Comment below. 2 hours later, Amara sat in her sister-in-law's glass office in Victoria Island, the Lagos skyline stretching endlessly beyond floor-to-ceiling windows she couldn't see but could feel in the room's expansive energy. Bizi Okafor Williams had built her legal practice from nothing, and her reputation for destroying cheating husbands in divorce court was legendary across Lagos's elite circles. "Play the recording again," Bizi said, her manicured fingers drumming against her mahogany desk. Amara's phone filled the office with Kemi's voice. "Stupid blind woman. You embarrassed me in front of my business partner." Then Folake's panicked whisper about people watching, and finally Amara's own steady response about not being deaf or stupid. "This is gold, Amara." Public assault, recorded confession of the affair, Folklore calling herself his business partner, while clearly being much more. But tell me about the financial records you mentioned. Amara reached into her leather handbag, pulling out a manila folder thick with papers. I've been having my accountant friend Tund review our finances for months. Kemi's been siphoning money from our joint catering account into a private investment with folklore. They've been planning to open competing restaurants across Lagos and Abuja. How much money? 12 million naira. Money I earned for my catering contracts. Money meant for our children's education. Beezy's intake of breath was sharp. That's embezzlement from a joint marital asset. In Nigerian family court, this kind of domestic betrayal combined with financial fraud? He'll lose everything. The afternoon sun was brutal, but inside the air-conditioned office, Amara felt cold. 13 years of marriage reduced to evidence folders and legal strategies. But she pushed down the sadness. There would be time for tears later. Right now, she needed to be the shrewd businesswoman who had built a catering empire despite losing her sight in a car accident 5 years earlier. There's something else, Amara said quietly. The children. Kemi Jr. and Zara. What about them? Folklare's been playing stepmother for months. Taking them to expensive restaurants, buying designer clothes. She's been poisoning them against me, telling them I'm holding their father back because of my condition. Beezy's eyes narrowed. Emotional manipulation of minor children. That's parental alienation, and it's actionable in family court. She paused, studying her sister-in-law's face. Amara, when you win this case, and you will win, what do you want? Just divorce? Or do you want to destroy him? The question hung in the air like incense in a church. Through the office windows, Lagos traffic created its familiar symphony of horns and engines. Somewhere out there, Kemi was probably with folklore, thinking his blind wife would quietly accept her humiliation and settle for whatever scraps he offered. I want him to understand that underestimating me was the biggest mistake of his life, Amara said. I want our children to know that their mother isn't weak just because she can't see. And I want every woman in Lagos to know that disability doesn't mean we have to accept disrespect. Then we're not just filing for divorce, Beezy smiled, and Amara could hear the predatory satisfaction in her voice. We're going to war. Full custody of the children, majority share of all marital assets, and public exposure of his affair and embezzlement. By the time we're finished, Kemi's reputation in Lagos business circles will be destroyed. Amara's phone buzzed with a text message. Beezy read it aloud. Kemi says, "Come home immediately. We need to talk. And delete that recording or you'll regret it." Is he threatening you? He's trying to. But he doesn't know about the copies I've already made, or the photographs. What photographs? Amara's smile was ice-cold. My neighbor Mrs. Funmi has been documenting folklare's visits to our house for months. Every time she came by while I was supposedly at work, every time she left early in the morning. Time-stamped, dated, and very clear about what was happening in my marriage while I was building our business. Beezy leaned back in her leather chair. Your husband really has no idea who he married, does he? No, Amara said, standing and folding her cane with practiced precision. But he's about to find out. As she prepared to leave the office, Amara felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Power. The same power that had driven her to rebuild her life after losing her sight, the same determination that had made her catering business the most sought after in Lagos. Kemi thought her disability made her vulnerable, but he was about to learn that adversity had only made her stronger. Her phone rang. Kemi's number flashed on the screen. Don't answer, Beezy advised. Let him sweat. Fear is a powerful negotiating tool. But as they prepared to leave, neither woman noticed the black Mercedes-Benz parked across from the building, or the man with a telephoto lens capturing their meeting through the law office windows. Kemi's chess game was more complex than they realized, and his next move would threaten everything Amara thought she had under control. What happens when the hunted becomes the hunter? Stay tuned to find out. The house in Surulere felt different when Amara returned that evening. The familiar sounds, the generator humming in the backyard, Zara practicing piano in the living room, Kemi Jr.'s video games echoing from his bedroom, seemed muted, as if the domestic betrayal that had exploded in Balogun Market had changed the very atmosphere of their family home. "Mama, your face." Zara's voice was sharp with concern as Amara entered through the front door. At 14, her daughter had inherited Kemi's sharp observational skills and Amara's stubborn independence. "It's nothing, my love. Just a small accident at the market." But Kemi Jr., 16 and increasingly skeptical of his parents' explanations for everything, wasn't buying it. "Papa's been pacing the living room for 2 hours, making phone calls and shouting. What really happened?" Before Amara could answer, Kemi's voice boomed from the kitchen. "Amara, get in here now." The children exchanged glances that Amara couldn't see but could feel in their sudden silence. This kind of tension had been building for months, and now it was spilling over into their children's awareness. "Go finish your homework," Amara told them gently. "Your father and I need to talk." She found Kemi in their spacious kitchen, the one she'd renovated with profits from her catering business. He was standing by the window overlooking their small garden, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapidly in Yoruba. When he saw her, he ended the call abruptly. "Delete the recording, Amara." "What recording?" She began preparing tea, her movements automatic despite her blindness. The familiar ritual of measuring water, finding the tea bags, lighting the gas stove, it grounded her when everything else felt chaotic. "Don't play games with me. I know you recorded what happened at the market. Delete it now, or there will be consequences." The threat in his voice was new. In 13 years of marriage, through all their arguments and disagreements, Kemi had never spoken to her with such cold menace. The emotional manipulation she'd been experiencing was escalating into something more dangerous. "I don't respond well to threats, Kemi. And I don't respond well to blackmail." He moved closer, and she could smell Folake's expensive perfume still clinging to his clothes. "You're going to delete that recording, accept a quiet divorce, and take what I offer you. Otherwise, things will get very difficult for you and the children." Amara set down her teacup with deliberate care. "Are you threatening our children now?" "I'm explaining reality. You're a blind woman with a small catering business. I'm a successful construction contractor with connections throughout Lagos. If you try to embarrass me publicly, I'll make sure you lose everything. Your business licenses, your client contracts, even your ability to see the children." The chess game was revealing itself. Kemi wasn't just protecting his affair, he was launching a preemptive strike to control the narrative of their divorce. But he'd made a crucial miscalculation. He thought her disability meant she'd been operating in darkness about his activities. "You're wrong about something, Kemi." "What's that?" "You said I have a small catering business." Amara smiled, reaching into her purse for a folder she'd prepared that afternoon. "Actually, according to my accountant, my business generated 14 million naira in revenue last year. Your construction company generated 11 million. The silence that followed was deafening. "That's impossible." "Is it?" "While you've been spending your days with Folake, I've been expanding. New corporate clients, wedding contracts with Lagos High Society, exclusive events in Abuja and Port Harcourt. I may not be able to see my success, but I can certainly count it." She slid the folder across the kitchen counter. "Those are copies of my business registration documents, updated just last month. My catering company is now registered as a separate entity from our joint assets. Which means the 12 million naira you stole from our joint account to invest with your girlfriend. That was theft from my independent business." Kemi's breathing was becoming labored. "You can't prove I stole anything. Bank transfers don't lie, Kemi. Neither do recorded phone calls between you and Folake about your investment strategy. Did you really think I wouldn't notice when you started redirecting my business payments to your personal account?" The kitchen fell silent except for the evening call to prayer echoing from the mosque down the street. Lagos was settling into its evening rhythm, but inside their home, a marriage was dying and a war was beginning. "What do you want?" Kemi asked finally. "Justice. Full custody of our children. Restoration of the money you stole. And a public apology for slapping me in front of hundreds of people." "Never. Then we'll see you in court." Amara stood, her cane clicking against the tile floor. And Kemi, when this gets to social media, which it will, because someone recorded your performance at the market, remember that Lagos loves an underdog story. A blind woman fighting a cheating husband for her children and her business? The city will be on my side. As she walked toward the door, Kemi's voice stopped her cold. You want to play dirty, Amara? Fine. But remember, I know where you were on the night of March 15th. And it wasn't at home with the children like you told everyone. Her blood turned to ice. March 15th. The night she'd spent at the mainland hotel with David, her business mentor who'd been helping her expand the catering company. Nothing had happened between them, but she'd been too embarrassed to tell Kemi she was getting business advice from another man, especially when their marriage was already strained. How did he know about that? Comment your thoughts on this betrayal. Share this with someone who loves African marriage drama. 3 days later, Amara discovered exactly how Kemi knew about March 15th when her phone rang at 6 a.m. with devastating news. Mrs. Okafor, this is Sergeant Williams from Victoria Island Police Station. We need you to come in immediately. There's been an allegation made against you. Amara sat up in bed, her heart pounding. What kind of allegation? Child endangerment and adultery-related charges. I can't discuss details over the phone, but you need to bring legal representation. After ending the call, Amara immediately dialed Beezy, who answered on the first ring. He's playing dirty, Beezy said after hearing the details. Meet me at the station in 1 hour. Don't say anything to anyone until I get there. The Victoria Island Police Station was chaos, a symphony of overlapping conversations in multiple languages, crying children, and the constant shuffle of paperwork. Amara sat in the waiting area, her cane propped against her chair, listening to Beezy argue with the duty sergeant in rapid-fire English mixed with Yoruba. This is ridiculous, Beezy was saying. My client is a respected businesswoman. These allegations are clearly retaliatory. Ma, we just process the complaints as they come in. Someone filed a report claiming Mrs. Okafor abandoned her children overnight to commit adultery, endangering their welfare. Amara's chest tightened. Kemi had twisted her innocent business meeting with David into something sordid, and somehow weaponized it against her fitness as a mother. Where is the complainant? Beezy demanded. Mr. Kemi Okafor is in interview room 2 with his legal representation. When they finally sat across from each other in the sterile police interview room, Kemi looked different. Gone was the guilty, defensive man from their kitchen confrontation. This version was calculating, confident, and flanked by 2 expensive lawyers Amara recognized from Lagos society pages. Amara, he said with false concern, I didn't want it to come to this, but you force my hand with your threats and legal maneuvering. Cut the act, Kemi, Beezy interrupted. What evidence do you have to support these absurd allegations? One of Kemi's lawyers, a sharp-dressed woman named Mrs. Adelique, slid a folder across the table. Time-stamped photographs of Mrs. Okafor entering and leaving the Eco Hotel on March 15th with an unidentified man. Credit card receipts showing she paid for a room. Phone records showing she lied to her children about her whereabouts. Amara felt sick. The photographs David had insisted they take outside the hotel, innocent documentation of their business meeting for her records, had been twisted into evidence of infidelity. And the child endangerment? Beezy asked. Mrs. Okafor left her minor children alone overnight without proper supervision while she conducted her affair. Zara, age 14, was responsible for her 16-year-old brother. This constitutes parental negligence under Nigerian law. The room spun around Amara. She'd been so careful, so strategic in building her case against Kemi, but he'd been 3 steps ahead. While she was gathering evidence of his affair, he'd been creating evidence of hers, even when no affair existed. My client needs to speak with me privately, Beezy announced. In the corridor outside the interview room, Beezy was frank. This is bad, Amara. Even if we prove the meeting was innocent, the optics are terrible. You lied about your whereabouts, spent hotel money, and left the children. In a custody battle, this could be devastating. But nothing happened with David. We were discussing expanding my catering business to Abuja. He's married with 4 children. I believe you, but proving that in court will be challenging. Meanwhile, Kemi's affair is documented, but he can claim it started after discovering your supposed betrayal. Amara leaned against the corridor wall, feeling the weight of Kemi's counterattack. He'd turned her greatest strength, her business success, into a weapon against her. The late-night planning sessions, the meetings with potential clients, the overnight trips to secure contracts, all of it could be twisted into evidence of neglecting their children. What are my options? Accept a settlement. Joint custody, split assets, sealed records so this doesn't become public. Or fight it and risk losing everything if a judge believes Kemi's version. Through the police station's windows, Lagos morning traffic was building to its usual chaos. Somewhere in that maze of cars and commerce, Folake was probably laughing about how perfectly their plan had worked. The blind wife who thought she was so clever had walked straight into a trap. But as Amara stood in that corridor, something crystallized in her mind. Kemi's counterattack was impressive, but it had one fatal flaw. It was built on the assumption that she'd been operating alone. That her disability had isolated her, made her dependent on him for information and connections. He was about to discover how wrong he was. "Busy," she said quietly. "Call David Adebayo. Tell him I need to see him immediately. And contact my client Mrs. Chen, the Chinese construction executive whose wedding I catered last month." Why? Because Kemi just made his biggest mistake. He assumed I was hiding something shameful when I met with David. But what if that meeting was actually the key to destroying his entire business empire? Amara smiled for the first time since entering the police station. Her husband's chess game was sophisticated, but he'd forgotten that she'd been learning to play in the dark for 5 years. And in the darkness, she'd developed senses he couldn't even imagine. The revenge that was coming would make his slap feel like a gentle breeze. Stay tuned. This story is about to get explosive. David Adebayo's office in Ikoyi overlooked Lagos Harbor, and as he spread documents across his conference table that afternoon, Amara could hear the distant sound of ships loading cargo, the sound of international business that would soon become Kemi's downfall. "I can't believe he had us followed," David said, his voice tight with anger. "My wife nearly left me when those photographs showed up on social media this morning." Social media? Amara's blood ran cold. Someone posted them in several Lagos gossip groups with the caption, "Blind businesswoman's secret affair exposed." The comments are brutal. Busy, who had accompanied Amara to the meeting, pulled out her phone. "It's worse than we thought. The story is trending on Instagram and Twitter. #BlindCheaterLagos is picking up traction." The public disgrace was complete. Kemi had not only filed false police reports but had weaponized Lagos's gossip network to destroy her reputation before she could expose his affair. It was a masterful character assassination disguised as a husband's righteous anger. "But here's what he doesn't know," David continued, anger giving way to determination. "That meeting on March 15th? We weren't just discussing your catering expansion. We were finalizing the investigative report into his construction company's building violations." Amara sat up straighter. "What violations?" "For 6 months, my firm has been investigating construction fraud across Lagos. Kemi's company has been using substandard materials in government contracts, bribing inspectors, and falsifying safety certifications. The Ikeja office building that partially collapsed last year? That was his work." The revelation hit like lightning. While Kemi was carefully orchestrating her downfall, she'd been unknowingly gathering evidence that could send him to prison. "People died in that collapse," Busy whispered. 3 people, David confirmed. "And we have documentation proving Kemi knew the building was unsafe but chose profit over public safety. Your catering company was just a convenient cover for our meetings. Who would suspect a blind woman of conducting corporate espionage?" Amara's mind raced. The same disability that Kemi used to manipulate and underestimate her had made her the perfect investigative partner. His arrogance had blinded him to the possibility that his supposedly helpless wife was actually documenting his crimes. "There's more," David said grimly. "The Chinese construction executive whose wedding you catered, Mrs. Chen? She's been investigating corruption in Lagos's construction sector for her company's expansion plans. Your catering contract gave her access to observe key players in the industry, including your husband. You mean? Mrs. Chen has been recording conversations at every event you've catered. She has Kemi discussing bribes, admitting to using inferior materials, even laughing about stupid Nigerians who don't know quality construction. The room fell silent except for the distant harbor sounds. Amara realized that while she'd been building a simple divorce case, she'd actually been assembling evidence for multiple criminal prosecutions. Her husband's betrayal ran deeper than infidelity. He was a criminal whose actions had cost lives. But how do we use this? BZ asked. If we reveal the investigation now, Kemi could destroy evidence or flee the country. We don't reveal it, Amara said quietly. We let him think he's winning. Both lawyers stared at her. He expects me to crumble under the social media attack and accept his settlement terms. Instead, I'll agree to mediation, act defeated and desperate. Meanwhile, we prepare the criminal evidence for the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. That's incredibly risky, David warned. If he discovers what we're really doing. He won't. Because he still thinks I'm just a blind woman who got lucky in the catering business. He has no idea that my luck comes from listening carefully, remembering everything, and building relationships he can't see or understand. Amara stood, her cane clicking against the marble floor. Set up the mediation for Friday. Make sure it's recorded for court purposes. And David, contact your friend at the EFCC. Tell him we'll have enough evidence to arrest Kemi for corruption, manslaughter, and fraud by Monday. What about the adultery allegations against you? By Friday, those will be the least of anyone's concerns. As they prepared to leave David's office, Amara felt a familiar sensation. The same predatory calm that had made her catering business so successful. She'd learned to hunt in the darkness, to read people through their voices and body language, to build relationships that transcended what people could see. Kemi thought he'd cornered her with his chess moves, but he'd actually walked into checkmate. His blind wife had been playing a different game entirely. One where vision was less important than patience, intelligence, and the ability to turn perceived weakness into devastating strength. Her phone buzzed with a text from Kemi, mediation Friday 2 p.m. Come ready to be reasonable, or things get much worse for you. She smiled as she typed her response. I'll be there. And Kemi, I'm bringing everything. He had no idea how literally she meant that. What happens when the predator becomes the prey? The next chapter will blow your mind. Friday's mediation session in Lekki's most exclusive law chambers felt like a tribunal. Kemi arrived with his team of lawyers, Folake by his side wearing designer clothes that Amara could price by sound, the whisper of expensive silk, the click of Italian heels on marble, the soft jingle of gold jewelry that cost more than most Lagos families earned in a year. Mrs. Okafor, the mediator began, your husband has presented significant evidence of adultery and child endangerment. Are you prepared to discuss settlement terms? Amara sat quietly beside BZ, her hands folded in her lap, projecting the image of a defeated woman ready to surrender. But under the conference table, her fingers were counting rosary beads, a nervous habit that actually helped her keep track of Kemi's lies. My client is willing to discuss terms, BZ said carefully. Kemi leaned forward, confidence radiating from his voice. Here's what I'm offering, Amara. Joint custody, you keep your little catering business, and we divide the house sale proceeds 50-50. In exchange, you sign a non-disclosure agreement about our marriage and accept full responsibility for your adultery. That seems reasonable, Amara said quietly, her voice trembling just enough to sell the performance. There's one more condition, Folake spoke for the first time, her Lagos socialite accent sharp with victory. You publicly apologize for lying about the affair and acknowledge that your husband was justified in seeking happiness elsewhere. The room fell silent. Even Kemi's lawyers looked uncomfortable with the cruelty of that demand. I understand, Amara whispered. But as she reached for her purse, ostensibly to find tissues, her fingers found something else entirely. A small recording device that had been capturing every word of Kemi's admissions and demands. Actually, Amara said, her voice suddenly steady, I have a counter-proposal. The change in her tone made everyone freeze. What? Kemi asked suspiciously. Amara stood up, her cane clicking against the floor with new authority. "I propose that you turn yourself in to the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission before they come to arrest you on Monday morning." The conference room erupted in confused voices, but Amara continued calmly. "You see, while you were having me followed and documented, I was actually helping to document your construction fraud, bribery schemes, and criminal negligence that killed 3 people in the Acacia building collapse." Kemi's face went ashen. "You're lying." "Am I?" Amara smiled, reaching into her purse again. This time she pulled out a thick folder. "These are copies of your company's falsified inspection reports, documented bribes to government officials, and recorded conversations where you admit to using substandard materials in government contracts." Beezy took over, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "My client has been working undercover with international investigators for 6 months. Every catering event, every business meeting, every social gathering, she was gathering evidence of corruption in Lagos's construction industry." "That's impossible," one of Kemi's lawyers protested. "She's blind." "Exactly," Amara replied. "Which made me the perfect investigative partner. Who suspects a blind woman of corporate espionage? You certainly didn't. While you were planning my humiliation, I was documenting your crimes." Folklake's voice was shrill with panic. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, Mrs. Adebayo, I can." Amara's smile was ice-cold as she used Folklake's married name deliberately. "Your husband is also under investigation for money laundering through his oil import business. The 12 million naira Kemi invested with you? That money is now evidence in a federal criminal case." The mediator looked bewildered. "Mrs. Okafor, these are very serious allegations." "They're not allegations. They're documented facts. Kemi, you have until Monday morning to turn yourself in voluntarily. After that, the EFCC will arrest you publicly, and every newspaper in Nigeria will know that the man who slapped his blind wife in Balogun Market is also responsible for killing innocent people through construction fraud." Kemi was on his feet, his face purple with rage. "You scheming bitch. You think you're so smart because you recorded some conversations? I'll destroy you. I'll take the children and disappear where you'll never find them. Actually, you won't." A new voice from the conference room doorway made everyone turn. David Adebayo entered with 2 men in suits, EFCC agents, their badges clearly visible. "Kemi Okafor, you're under arrest for corruption, fraud, and criminal negligence resulting in death. You have the right to remain silent." As the handcuffs clicked around Kemi's wrists, Amara felt something she hadn't experienced in months: complete vindication. The domestic betrayal that had started with a slap in a Lagos market was ending with her cheating spouse in federal custody. "The children," Folklake whispered, her designer confidence finally cracking. "We'll be fine," Amara replied. "Unlike their father, I actually put their welfare above my personal desires." As the EFCC agents led Kemi away, he looked back at his wife one final time. "I underestimated you." "Yes," Amara agreed. "You did." The blind woman he'd thought he could manipulate and discard had just orchestrated his complete destruction. And the revenge was only beginning. Share this with someone who believes justice always wins. Comment below what you think happens next. The news of Kemi Okafor's arrest exploded across Lagos like wildfire. Within hours, his mugshot was trending on social media with headlines like "Construction Kingpin Falls" and "Blind Wife Brings Down Corrupt Husband." The same gossip networks that had destroyed Amara's reputation with adultery rumors were now hailing her as a hero who'd exposed deadly corruption. But victory came with unexpected complications. Amara stood in her kitchen that Saturday morning, listening to her children's voices in the living room as they watched the morning news. Their father's arrest was the lead story on every Lagos television station, and she could hear the confusion and hurt in their whispered conversations. "Mama," Zara appeared in the kitchen doorway, her 14-year-old voice small and uncertain. "Is it true what they're saying about Papa? That he killed people?" Before Amara could answer, Kemi Jr. joined them, his 16-year-old anger barely contained. "How long have you known? How long have you been lying to us?" The co-parenting conflict she'd been dreading was here. Her children were learning that their father was a criminal and their mother was responsible for exposing him. The family values she'd tried to protect were colliding with the justice she'd fought to achieve. "Sit down, both of you," Amara said gently, guiding them to the kitchen table where she'd had so many conversations about homework, dreams, and growing up. "I need to tell you the truth about everything." She explained it carefully. Their father's affair, the financial theft, the construction fraud, and her role in the investigation. She watched their faces change through their voices, heard their childhood innocence cracking as adult realities intruded. "So you were never cheating?" Zara asked. "Never. I was working with investigators to gather evidence of your father's crimes." "But why didn't you tell us?" Kemi Jr.'s voice was accusatory. "We've been living with a murderer and you said nothing?" The question cut deep because it was fair. In protecting them from knowledge that could have put them in danger, she'd also kept them in the dark about living with a man whose negligence had killed innocent people. "Because I needed proof before making such serious accusations. And because I was terrified of losing you both if I was wrong." "But you weren't wrong," Zara said quietly. "No, I wasn't." The kitchen fell silent except for the sounds of Lagos waking up outside. Generators starting, vendors calling their wares, the familiar rhythm of a city that never truly sleeps. But inside their home, everything had changed forever. Kemi Jr. stood up abruptly. "I'm going to see Papa." "The police won't allow visitors yet," Amara said. "Then I'll wait outside the station until they do. He's still my father." After he left, Zara moved closer to her mother. "Mama, are you proud of what you did?" It was the hardest question Amara had faced in this entire ordeal. Was she proud of destroying her children's father? Of exposing corruption that would send him to prison for years? Of choosing justice over family unity? "I'm proud that I stood up for what was right," she said finally. "But I'm heartbroken that it cost you and your brother the father you thought you knew." "The father we thought we knew was a lie anyway," Zara replied with wisdom that shouldn't exist in a 14-year-old voice. The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. Amara heard multiple footsteps on her front porch, the murmur of several voices. "Mrs. Okafor?" A woman's voice called through the door. "I'm Sarah Ogundamu from Lagos Television. We'd like to interview you about your heroic actions exposing construction corruption." More voices joined in, reporters, camera crews, the entire Lagos media establishment wanting to tell the story of the blind woman who brought down a corrupt construction magnate. The public disgrace that Kemi had orchestrated against her had backfired spectacularly, transforming her into a symbol of justice and resilience. But Amara wasn't ready for heroism. She was still processing the emotional manipulation she'd endured, still protecting her children from the fallout, still grieving the marriage that had died long before its public execution. "Tell them I'm not giving interviews today," she told Zara. "But Mama, this is your moment. Everyone knows you were right. Being right doesn't make this less painful, my love." As the media crowd grew outside their home, Amara's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Okafor, this is Mrs. Chen from Chen Construction International. I wanted to personally thank you for your courage in exposing the corruption that has plagued Lagos's construction industry. Mrs. Chen, I hope our arrangement didn't cause problems for your business." "Quite the opposite. The evidence we gathered through your catering events has helped us secure 3 major government contracts. Lagos officials want to work with companies they know are honest." She paused. "I'm calling with a proposal. My company needs a permanent catering partner for our expansion across West Africa. The contract would be worth 50 million naira annually." Amara nearly dropped the phone. 50 million naira would make her one of the most successful businesswomen in Lagos, would secure her children's futures, would transform her from a wronged wife into a true business mogul. That's incredibly generous. "It's business, Mrs. Okafor. Your integrity is worth more than money in our industry. Think about it and call me Monday." After ending the call, Amara sat in her kitchen processing the whiplash of emotions. In 1 week, she'd gone from a humiliated wife to a celebrated whistleblower to a potential business magnate. But success felt hollow when it came at the cost of her family's stability. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, "You destroyed my life, but this isn't over. Prison won't hold me forever, and when I get out, you'll pay for what you've done. K." The threat from Kemi's smuggled phone chilled her blood. Even from police custody, he was still trying to manipulate and intimidate her. The revenge story she thought was ending was actually entering its most dangerous phase. Outside, the reporters were getting louder, more insistent. Inside, her son was grieving for a father who didn't deserve his loyalty, and her daughter was growing up too fast in the ruins of their family's public destruction. Amara had won the war against her cheating spouse, but victory was more complicated than she'd imagined. Justice didn't heal the wounds left by domestic betrayal, and exposing corruption didn't restore the innocence her children had lost. But as she sat in her kitchen, listening to Lagos's chaos outside and her family's pain inside, Amara made a decision. She would give that interview, take Mrs. Chen's contract, and build something meaningful from the ashes of her marriage. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's transformation. Stay tuned to see what happens when success brings new dangers. 3 weeks later, Amara's new reality was a kaleidoscope of contradictions. Her catering business had expanded overnight, the Chen construction contract, plus dozens of new clients who wanted to work with the woman who exposed the corruption. She'd moved from her modest Surulere home to a luxury apartment in Victoria Island, complete with security systems and a full-time housekeeper who doubled as the children's companion when Amara traveled for business. But success came with shadows. "Mama, there's a man outside taking pictures again," Zara reported from the living room window of their new 15th-floor apartment. "Same car as yesterday." Amara set down her phone, where she'd been coordinating catering for a government anti-corruption summit. The kind of irony that would have been funny if it weren't so dangerous. Kemi's threats from prison weren't idle. His construction company had powerful connections, and some of those connections weren't happy about his arrest. "Call building security," she told Zara, "and stay away from the windows." The emotional manipulation that had defined her marriage was now coming from multiple sources. Anonymous phone calls at all hours, threatening letters delivered to her business address, and the constant surveillance that made her feel like a prisoner in her own success. Her phone rang. Beezy's number. "We have a problem," her sister-in-law said without preamble. Kemi's lawyers filed an appeal claiming prosecutorial misconduct. "They're arguing that you conducted illegal surveillance and that evidence obtained through your undercover operation violates his constitutional rights." Amara felt the familiar cold grip of fear. Can they overturn his conviction? "They're trying. Worse, they filed a civil lawsuit against you for conspiracy to violate spousal privacy and intentional destruction of reputation. They're seeking damages of 100 million naira. The number hit like a physical blow. Even with her new business success, that amount would destroy her financially and potentially send her to prison herself. "But I was working with federal investigators." "That's our defense, but Kemi's new legal team is very sophisticated. They're arguing that you exceeded your authority as a civilian informant and that your personal vendetta compromised the investigation." Amara walked to her apartment's floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at Lagos's sprawling cityscape. Somewhere in that maze of buildings and traffic, her former husband was orchestrating her downfall from his prison cell, turning her victory into potential destruction. "There's something else," Beezy continued. "Folake Adebayo has been granted witness protection status. She's claiming you threatened her life and that she fears retribution for cooperating with Kemi's defense." "That's absurd." "Is it?" "Because someone vandalized her car last week, and the security footage shows a woman matching your height and build." Amara's blood ran cold. Someone was framing her for crimes she hadn't committed, using her disability as a cover to make the frame-up believable. After all, who would suspect a blind woman of car vandalism? "Beezy, you know I didn't." "I know. But perception matters in court, and right now, the narrative is shifting. Kemi's lawyers are painting you as a vengeful wife who manipulated federal investigators to destroy an innocent man." After ending the call, Amara sat in her luxurious living room feeling more trapped than she'd ever felt in her modest family home. Success hadn't brought freedom, it had made her a bigger target. Kemi Jr. emerged from his bedroom, dressed for school but moving with the careful deliberation he'd developed since his father's arrest. At 17, he'd grown protective of both his mother and his imprisoned father, torn between conflicting loyalties that no teenager should have to navigate. "Mama, I need to tell you something." The seriousness in his voice made her stomach clench. "What is it, my love?" "Papa called me yesterday. From prison." "That's impossible. He's not allowed phone privileges yet." "He's not supposed to be, but he found a way. He wants me to do something." The kitchen suddenly felt arctic despite Lagos's perpetual heat. "What kind of something?" "He wants me to testify that you've been abusing us. That you forced us to lie about his relationship with Aunt Folake, and that you threatened to send us away if we didn't support your stories." Amara felt the world tilt around her. Kemi was trying to use their own son as a weapon against her, to manipulate a teenager's love for his father into perjury that could destroy her. "And what did you tell him?" Kemi Jr. was quiet for a long moment. "I told him I'd think about it." The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that Amara couldn't breathe. Her own son, the child she'd protected and provided for, was considering helping his criminal father destroy her life. "But Mama," he continued, and she heard tears in his voice, "I can't do it. I know what Papa did was wrong. I know you were trying to protect people. But he's still my father, and he sounds so scared in prison." Amara pulled her son into her arms, feeling his confusion and pain in the way he held onto her. "I'm not going to ask you to choose between us. Whatever you decide, I'll understand. Even if it means I testify against you." The question hung in the air like smoke from Lagos traffic. Outside their luxury apartment, the city continued its relentless pace, but inside their family was facing the final destruction that domestic betrayal could inflict. "Even then," Amara whispered, "because real love doesn't come with conditions or threats." As she held her son, Amara realized that Kemi's most devastating revenge wasn't the lawsuits or the surveillance or even the potential prison time. It was forcing her to watch him poison their children's hearts with the same manipulation that had nearly destroyed her. But she also realized something else. She'd survived his worst already, and she was still standing. Whatever came next, she'd face it with the same intelligence and determination that had brought down a corrupt construction empire. The war wasn't over, but she wasn't the same woman who'd been slapped in Balogun Market. That woman had been vulnerable because she'd believed in the goodness of her family. This woman knew better, and that knowledge made her dangerous in ways Kemi couldn't imagine. What happens when a mother has to fight for her children against their own father? This story gets darker. The courtroom in Lagos High Court was packed beyond capacity, with journalists, curious citizens, and legal observers filling every seat. The case had become a sensation across Nigeria, the blind whistleblower versus the corrupt construction magnate, with their teenage children caught in the crossfire. Amara sat beside Beezy at the defendant's table, listening to Kemi's lead attorney paint her as a manipulative woman who had orchestrated an elaborate frame-up of an innocent man. The narrative was seductive and well-crafted. A bitter wife using her disability to garner sympathy while destroying her husband's life through fabricated evidence and conspiracy with corrupt investigators. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the attorney was saying, "Mrs. Amara Okafor would have you believe she's a hero. But the evidence will show that she's actually a criminal who violated her husband's constitutional rights, manipulated federal investigators, and endangered her own children in pursuit of personal revenge." From across the courtroom, Amara could feel Kemi's presence in the defendant's box. Even in prison clothes, even facing multiple felony charges, he radiated the confidence that had first attracted her 20 years ago. That same confidence had evolved into the arrogance that destroyed their marriage and killed innocent people, but it remained magnetically persuasive. "Your Honor," Beezy stood to address the judge, "the prosecution will prove that Mrs. Okafor acted as a lawful civilian informant, working closely with federal investigators to expose construction fraud that cost lives and defrauded taxpayers of millions of naira. Her actions were heroic, not criminal." As the day wore on, witness after witness took the stand. EFCC agents testified about Amara's cooperation in their investigation. Mrs. Chen explained how the evidence gathered at catered events had helped expose widespread corruption. David Adebayo presented technical documentation of Kemi's construction fraud. But then came the devastating testimony. "Your Honor, I call Kemi Okafor Jr. to the stand." Amara's heart shattered as she heard her son's footsteps approaching the witness box. At 17, he looked younger under the courtroom's harsh lights, his voice trembling as he took the oath to tell the truth. "Kemi Jr., the defense attorney began gently, tell the court about your home life with your mother over the past year." "My mother. She changed after she started meeting with that man David. She became secretive, angry all the time. She would disappear for hours and lie about where she'd been." Each word was a knife in Amara's chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. This was the final phase of Kemi's emotional manipulation, turning their own child into a weapon against her. "Did your mother ever threaten you or your sister?" Kemi Jr. hesitated, and in that pause, Amara heard the battle raging in her son's heart. She said that if we told Papa about her meetings, we would regret it." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Even Beezy looked stricken by this testimony from her own nephew. But as the cross-examination began, something unexpected happened. "Kemi Jr.," Beezy said carefully, "do you know what your father's construction company was doing during the time your mother was meeting with investigators?" We weren't supposed to talk about Papa's work. But you overheard conversations, didn't you? Between your father and his business associates." The teenager's composure cracked slightly. "Sometimes. What did you hear?" "Objection!" the defense attorney shouted, but the judge overruled. Papa and his friends would laugh about cutting corners, about paying inspectors to look the other way, about stupid customers who didn't know good materials from bad. The courtroom fell silent as the son's testimony inadvertently corroborated the prosecution's case against his father. "And the Ikeja building that collapsed? Did your father ever discuss that?" Tears were now streaming down Kemi Jr.'s face. He said it was just bad luck. That buildings fall down sometimes. But Mama cried when she heard about the people who died, and Papa just turned up the television. The transformation was visible, the manipulated child becoming a truthful young man, even when that truth destroyed both his parents. "One final question, Kemi Jr., if you had to choose between protecting your mother and protecting your father, who would you choose?" The question hung in the air like incense in a cathedral. In the gallery, Zara was crying silently. In the defendant's box, Kemi's face had gone ashen as he realized his manipulation had backfired spectacularly. "I would choose the truth," Kemi Jr. said quietly. "Because that's what Mama taught me, even when the truth hurts." As court recessed for the day, Amara sat in the courthouse corridor, emotionally drained from watching her family's destruction play out in public. Her son had tried to betray her to save his father, but his innate honesty had ultimately vindicated both the investigation and her parenting. Beezy sat beside her on the wooden bench. "The jury's going to acquit you, Amara." Kemi Jr.'s testimony sealed it. "At what cost? My children will never recover from this trauma. They're stronger than you think. And they're learning that integrity matters more than family loyalty when that loyalty protects evil." As they prepared to leave the courthouse, a court officer approached with a message that made Amara's blood freeze. "Mrs. Okafor, there's been an incident at your daughter's school. Someone tried to abduct Zara during lunch break. She's safe, but the police want to speak with you immediately." The final escalation had arrived. Kemi's allies weren't just trying to destroy her legally and financially. They were now targeting her children directly. The revenge story that had started with a slap in a Lagos market was about to become a fight for her family's survival. And this time, the stakes were life and death. Don't go anywhere. The explosive finale is coming next. 6 months later, Amara stood on the balcony of her new home in Abuja, listening to her children's laughter echoing from the swimming pool below. The sound was medicine for wounds that had taken months to heal, wounds inflicted not just by Kemi's betrayal, but by a system that had tried to destroy her for exposing corruption. The attempted kidnapping had been the turning point. When CCTV footage revealed that the would-be abductors were employees of a security company contracted to several construction firms under investigation, the case against Amara collapsed overnight. The jury had acquitted her in record time, and the judge had issued a scathing rebuke of what he called intimidation tactics designed to silence whistleblowers. Kemi was now serving 15 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole. Folake had fled Nigeria when her money laundering charges were filed, leaving behind a paper trail that implicated dozens of other corrupt businesspeople across West Africa. "Mama!" Zara called from the pool. "Come down. The water's perfect." At 15, her daughter had grown into a confident young woman who spoke publicly about supporting anti-corruption efforts. She'd testified before the National Assembly about the need to protect whistleblower families, and her poise under pressure had impressed even hardened politicians. Kemi Jr., now 18 and preparing for university, had channeled his complex emotions about his father into advocacy work. He volunteered with organizations that helped children of incarcerated parents, understanding better than most adults the psychological damage that parental criminality inflicted on families. "Mrs. Okafor?" Her personal assistant's voice came from the living room. "Mrs. Chen is on the phone from Beijing. She says it's urgent." The Chen Construction Partnership had exceeded every expectation. Amara's catering empire now spanned 5 West African countries, employing over 200 people and generating annual revenues that placed her among Nigeria's most successful businesswomen. But more importantly, her success had created opportunities for other women entrepreneurs across the region. "Amara, congratulations." Mrs. Chen's voice was effusive with excitement. "The African Union has approved our proposal. You've been selected to cater the Continental Anti-Corruption Summit in Addis Ababa next year. This will be the largest gathering of African leaders focused on fighting corruption in the continent's history." The irony was perfect. The blind woman who had exposed her husband's construction fraud would now feed presidents and prime ministers as they developed strategies to fight corruption across Africa. "Mrs. Chen, this is overwhelming. It's recognition of what you've accomplished. Your story has inspired anti-corruption movements across 6 countries. You've proven that individual courage can challenge systemic corruption and win." After ending the call, Amara sat in her home office, surrounded by awards and certificates that she couldn't see but could touch, physical reminders of how completely her life had transformed. The Nigerian National Honor for Public Service, the West African Business Women's Leadership Award, the African Union Certificate of Excellence in Anti-Corruption Advocacy. But the most meaningful recognition sat on her desk in a simple frame, a handwritten letter from the widow of one of the men killed in the Acacia building collapse. "Mrs. Okafor," it read, "you gave my husband's death meaning by ensuring his killer was punished. You turned our tragedy into justice. My children sleep better knowing that other families won't suffer what we suffered because you were brave enough to speak truth to power." Her phone chimed with a text message that made her smile. David Adebayo, whose friendship had survived the scandal and legal battles, saw the news about the AU summit. "Proud of you. Coffee tomorrow to celebrate." Their relationship had evolved into something deeper than business partnership or friendship, a mutual respect built on shared values and complementary strengths. He was considering proposing, and she was considering saying yes, but both understood that her children's healing came first. "Mama." Kemi Jr. appeared in the doorway, dripping from the pool and grinning. "Zara and I want to know if we can invite friends over for dinner this weekend. We want to show off your cooking to our school friends." "Of course, my love. But you know they'll have to help prepare the meal. Everyone who eats in this house contributes to the work." "Deal," he laughed, and she heard in his voice the boy he'd been before corruption and betrayal had forced him to grow up too quickly. As evening settled over Abuja, Amara reflected on the journey from that devastating day in Balogun Market to this moment of hard-won peace. The domestic betrayal that had shattered her world had ultimately revealed her strength. The infidelity in marriage that had humiliated her publicly had exposed corruption that was destroying her country. The cheating spouse who had thought her disability made her weak had discovered that adversity had made her unbreakable. The revenge she'd chosen wasn't destruction. It was transformation. Instead of letting Kemi's betrayal diminish her, she'd used it as fuel to build something meaningful. Her story had become a beacon for other women facing domestic betrayal, showing them that survival was possible and success was achievable. Her phone rang one final time, busy calling from Lagos. "Amara, I have news. The Supreme Court upheld Kemi's conviction on appeal. It's over. He's never getting out of prison." "How do you feel about that?" Beezy asked carefully, knowing the complex emotions her sister-in-law still carried. "I feel free," Amara admitted. "Not because he's in prison, but because justice was served. The families of his victims got closure. The corruption he represented was exposed and punished. And most importantly, our children learned that truth and justice matter more than family loyalty when that loyalty protects evil. As she hung up the phone and joined her children by the pool, Amara marveled at how completely her life had changed. The blind wife who had been slapped in a Lagos market had become one of Africa's most respected business leaders and anti-corruption advocates. But the greatest victory wasn't professional success or public recognition. It was the sound of her children's laughter, free from the shadow of their father's crimes and their mother's shame. It was the knowledge that she'd chosen truth over comfort, justice over quiet suffering, courage over compliance. The revenge story that had started with betrayal had ended with renewal. And sometimes, that's the sweetest revenge of all, not destroying your enemies, but building something so beautiful from the ruins they created that their destruction becomes irrelevant. In Lagos, Balogun Market continued its ancient rhythm of commerce and conversation. But somewhere in that bustling maze of vendors and customers, people still told the story of the blind woman who had turned her husband's cruelest moment into a catalyst for justice. They called it the greatest revenge Lagos had ever seen. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in the power of justice and resilience. Comment below and tell me, what was your favorite moment from Amara's story? And don't forget to turn on notifications. Tales by Ben has many more gripping African stories coming your way. Where are you watching from? I love hearing from viewers around the world who believe that truth always wins in the end.